Listen, I want you to take a second and think about a very specific number. Not $1 million, not 10 million, but $1,000. Imagine waking up on the first of the month, checking your account, and seeing an extra $1,000 sitting there. It hasn't come from your boss. It hasn't come from a side hustle, and you didn't have to trade an hour of your life for it. For our friend Mark, this was the survival number. He realized that if he could just hit that $1,000 mark in passive income, his life would fundamentally change. It covers the groceries, the utility bills, and maybe that car payment. It's the first real taste of freedom. But as we stand here in 2026, the world looks a bit different than it did a few years ago. We've seen inflation stay stubborn, we've seen the market go through a wild ride in 24 and 25, and Mark is asking the same question you probably are: is SCHD still the king of dividends? And exactly how much of it do I need to hold to hit that $1,000 monthly goal today? In this video, we aren't just going to give you a single number and end the video. We're going to dive into the mechanics of SCHD in this current 2026 economy. We're going to talk about the tax man, the hidden risks that no one mentions, and I'm going to show you Mark's personal roadmap to hitting this goal. By the end, you'll know exactly how many shares you need, and more importantly, if this is the right move for your retirement. Let's crunch the numbers. Now, before we get to the how much, we have to answer the why. Why are we still talking about SCHD in 2026? Well, look at what Mark has been seeing in the news lately. We've had tech stocks flying to the moon on AI hype, and we've had high-yield trap funds promising 20% returns that eventually collapse. But through all that noise, SCHD has remained the old reliable. SCHD follows the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 index. It's not just looking for the highest yield, it's looking for the highest quality. It filters for companies with strong cash flow, low debt, and a 10-year history of growing their dividends. We're talking about the backbones of the economy, companies like Home Depot, Pepsi, and Chevron. Mark realized that in a world where everything feels uncertain, he wants his income to be certain. He wants a paycheck that grows every year, regardless of who is in the White House or what the Federal Reserve is doing with interest rates. SCHD is designed to be that paycheck. But to get that paycheck, you have to pay the admission price. So Mark sat down with his coffee, opened his spreadsheet and said, okay, I want $12,000 a year. That's my $1,000 a month. What's it going to cost me in 2026? To calculate this, we have to look at the current dividend yield. As of early 2026, SCHD's yield has stabilized around 3.4%. Now, remember, this fluctuates with the stock price, but let's use 3.4% as our baseline. To get $12,000 a year from a 3.4% yield, Mark needs a total portfolio value of roughly $353,000. Mark looked at that number and almost choked on his coffee. $350,000, that feels like a mountain. But then I told him, Mark, don't look at the total value yet. Let's look at the shares, because shares are what you actually own. At a current price of roughly $85 per share, again, this is our 2026 estimate, Mark needs to own approximately 4,150 shares of SCHD. Now, I know you're thinking, I don't have 350 grand sitting under my mattress, and neither did Mark. But here's the secret that the big banks don't want you to focus on: yield on cost. Mark doesn't need to buy all 4,000 shares today. He just needs to start the snowball. But wait, Mark made a classic mistake. He thought, great, I'll get my $1,000 and pay my bills. And that's when I had to remind him about his uninvited guest, the IRS. This is something a lot of people ignore in their retirement planning. If Mark is holding SCHD in a regular taxable brokerage account, those dividends aren't all his to keep. Since SCHD's dividends are qualified, they are usually taxed at a lower rate, 15% for most people. So if Mark gets $1,000, but the government takes $150 of it, he's only left with $850. He's short of his goal. To actually keep $1,000 a month in his pocket after taxes, Mark realized he actually needs to target about $1,176 in gross income. This means his true target for his portfolio isn't $350K, it's closer to $415,000. Mark sighed and said, The more I learn, the bigger the mountain gets. But I told him, that's why we use the dividend growth strategy, Mark. We're going to let the companies do the heavy lifting for us. This is where SCHD becomes magical. Over the last decade, SCHD has grown its dividend by an average of about 11% per year. Let's look at Mark's roadmap. If he starts today and buys as much as he can, and he reinvests those dividends, the drip strategy, his yield on cost starts to skyrocket. In 10 years, even if SCHD's yield for new buyers is still 3.4%, Mark's personal yield on his original investment could be 8 or 9%. This means that, in the future, Mark won't need $400,000 to get his $1,000 check. The companies he owns today will be paying him so much more in the future that the mountain starts to shrink on its own. This is how regular people fund their retirement. They don't save millions, they buy income engines that grow over time. Now at this point, Mark was getting excited. He was ready to go all in, but I had to stop him. I said, Mark, there is no such thing as a risk-free investment, not even SCHD. In 2026, we have to be honest about the risks. First, there is sector concentration. SCHD is heavy on financials, industrials, and consumer staples. It doesn't own a lot of the high-flying AI tech stocks. If the old economy struggles, while tech soars, Mark might feel like he's missing out. Second, there is interest rate sensitivity. SCHD companies often carry debt to fund their operations. If interest rates stay higher for longer in 2026 and 2027, some of these companies might struggle to grow their dividends as fast as they used to. And finally, there is the market volatility. Your dividend check might be stable, but the value of your shares will go up and down. Mark had to ask himself, can I stay calm if my $300,000 portfolio drops to $250,000 in a market crash, as long as my $1,000 check still arrives? If the answer is no, then he isn't ready for this strategy. Looking at all the data, Mark made his decision. He realized that $1,000 a month was a journey, not a sprint. He decided to stop chasing the hot stocks and started a consistent buying plan. He's buying 50 shares a month, reinvesting every cent, and letting the quality of the SCHD companies work for him. He knows he needs roughly 4,000 shares to hit his target, but he also knows that thanks to dividend growth, he might hit his goal much sooner than he thinks. He's not worried about the daily price anymore, he's just focused on the share count. Every share he buys is a tiny worker, bringing him one step closer to that mailbox money. Hitting $1,000 a month with SCHD is a mathematical certainty if you have the discipline to stay the course. It's the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it retirement strategy for the modern world of 2026. But I know what Mark was thinking next. And maybe you are too. He said, okay, SCHD is great for income, but what if I want more growth? What if I want to build a bigger pile of cash while I'm still young? That's the big debate. Total growth versus dividend income. And specifically, how does SCHD hold up against the king of the market, VOO? To answer that, I actually took $50,000 and ran a brutal head-to-head battle between VOO and SCHD. I looked at the returns, the dividend hikes, and exactly what happens to your wealth over 20 years with each one. If you want to see if SCHD is really the only ETF you need, or if you should be leaning into the S&P 500 instead, you have to see the results of this test. Click the video on your screen right now. What happens when you invest $50K in VOO versus SCHD? And let's find out which one is the true winner for your freedom. I'll see you there.